At certain points in history, the most significant changes do not announce themselves with drama. No scandal erupts, no document shakes the foundations, no harsh words dominate the headlines. Everything appears calm, orderly, familiar. And yet, beneath that calm surface, something shifts. A tone changes. A weight settles. Those who are attentive sense it immediately, not because something explosive has happened, but because something subtle has been introduced, something that invites reflection, unease, and careful listening. This was one of those points. After the recent consistory, Pope Leo XIV addressed the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See. It was a formal meeting, shaped by centuries of protocol, restrained language, and global awareness. Representatives of nations from every corner of the world were present, some Catholic, many not. As expected, the Pope offered a wide-ranging reflection on the state of the world, its conflicts and hopes, its moral responsibilities, its wounds and aspirations. The speech followed a familiar path, echoing themes that have marked papal addresses in recent years: peace over violence, dialogue over confrontation, dignity over exploitation, and the shared responsibility of nations toward the common good. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing seemed provocative. And yet, as is often the case, it was not the longest sections or the most formal passages that lingered afterward. It was a single sentence, brief and carefully worded, that began to echo far beyond the walls in which it was spoken. In every sincere religious search, there is a reflection of the one divine mystery that embraces all creation. If you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos like this, because what you're about to hear is not just news, it's a wake-up call for every heart that still believes truth should burn brighter than silence. Now grab your rosary, quiet your spirit, and let your heart listen, not just with ears, but with faith. At first glance, the sentence appears gentle, even consoling. It sounds like an attempt to build bridges in a fractured world, to acknowledge the deep religious longing that exists across cultures and traditions. Many heard it as a message of respect. Some heard humility. Others heard hope, a reminder that humanity's desire for meaning is universal and not confined to one people or place. But among many Catholics, priests, theologians, catechists, and ordinary believers who have lived through decades of evolving ecclesial language, the sentence did not simply reassure. It unsettled. Not because it was false. Not because it was heretical. But because it raised a question. And that question was heavy enough to disturb the silence that followed. This was not an offhand remark or a poetic aside. It was a deliberate statement placed within the context of interreligious dialogue and religious freedom. Because of that, its importance could not be dismissed. Words spoken by a pope are never merely words. They are received, interpreted, shortened, translated, shared, and often separated from their original context. They become headlines, sound bites, and social media posts. They reach a faithful who are already struggling to understand what the Church is asking them to believe, to defend, and to proclaim in an increasingly complex world. This is where the tension begins. To understand it, the sentence must be read carefully and patiently. The Pope speaks of every sincere religious search. He does not speak of every religion as a complete system, nor of every doctrine as equally true. He speaks of the human act of searching itself, the interior movement of the heart that reaches beyond the visible toward the transcendent. That distinction matters. He then uses the word reflection. Not identity. Not equivalence. Not fullness. A reflection suggests something indirect, something that points beyond itself, something real but incomplete. Finally, he refers to the one divine mystery that embraces all creation. A phrase that emphasizes unity and transcendence, rather than specificity or historical concreteness. From a strictly theological standpoint, nothing here contradicts Catholic teaching. The Church has always affirmed that the human heart is oriented toward God, that the desire for the infinite is written into every soul. Even outside the visible boundaries of the Church, there can be fragments of truth, genuine longing, and authentic intuitions of the divine. Saint Justin Martyr spoke of the seeds of the Word scattered throughout the world. The Second Vatican Council taught that elements of truth and sanctification can be found beyond the Church's visible structure. In this sense, the Pope's words are defensible. They rest on a long theological tradition that recognizes religiosity as a fundamental human reality rather than a mere cultural invention. Human beings search because they were made to search. And yet, the difficulty does not lie in what the sentence affirms. It lies in what it leaves unsaid. In a time marked by doctrinal confusion, fragile catechesis, and generations of Catholics formed more by emotion than by substance, silence is not neutral. When certain things are not named, their absence is felt. The sentence does not mention Christ. It does not speak of the Incarnation. It does not speak of the cross. It does not speak of the Eucharist. It does not speak of the Church as the sacrament of salvation. The divine mystery is invoked, but its face is not shown. Its name is not spoken. Its history is not recalled. For many faithful Catholics, this absence is not a small detail. Christianity does not claim merely that humanity searches for God. It proclaims that God searched for humanity and found it. That the mystery did not remain distant or abstract, but entered history, took flesh, suffered, died, and rose again. The divine mystery is not anonymous. It has a name. When that name is not spoken, even for understandable diplomatic reasons, the risk becomes real. The risk is not that trained theologians will misunderstand the nuance. The risk is that ordinary believers will. In a church already shaped by years of careful phrasing, open-ended formulations, and statements that require expert explanation, a sentence like this can easily be received not as a precise theological distinction, but as confirmation of something else entirely. That all religions are ultimately valid paths to the same destination. That proclaiming Christ is optional rather than essential. That mission is secondary. That the cross is symbolic instead of necessary. This is not an accusation against the Pope. It is a pastoral reality. The Pope does not speak only to scholars. He speaks to a world that consumes sound bites rather than footnotes. In that world, ambiguity does not remain theoretical. It produces real effects in how people think, believe, and live. And so a quiet question begins to emerge. Not shouted, not dramatic, but persistent. If every sincere religious search reflects the divine mystery, why insist on conversion? Why endure persecution? Why remain faithful when the cost is high? These questions do not arise from rebellion. They arise from confusion. And that confusion is the shadow cast by a single, carefully chosen sentence. The story does not end there. The same speech that opened this door also introduced another reality, one that complicates the picture even further. In the midst of diplomatic language and calls for dialogue, Pope Leo XIV spoke of suffering that cannot be ignored. He referred to victims of violence, to persecution, to Christians who have suffered and continue to suffer at the hands of jihadist movements and extremist ideologies. These were not vague references. They were acknowledgments of real blood, real suffering, real martyrdom. Here, a striking contrast emerges. On one side, a sentence emphasizing the shared reflection of a divine mystery across religious searches. On the other, an acknowledgement that religious differences are not merely theoretical. They have concrete, often deadly consequences. Christians are not persecuted because they believe in a vague mystery. They are persecuted because they confess a specific name, Jesus Christ. This is where the internal tension of the speech becomes difficult to ignore. Dialogue is affirmed, and rightly so. The Church has always sought peace where peace is possible. But violence is also acknowledged, implicitly admitting that not all religious expressions are interchangeable in their demands, histories, or effects. What remains missing is the explicit connection between these two realities. The Pope does not clearly articulate how it can be true that there is a universal religious longing, and yet a singular revelation that provokes opposition precisely because of its claim to truth. This silence is not doctrinally wrong, but it is pastorally incomplete. Christianity is not only about shared searching. It is about a decisive encounter that divides history into before and after. Christ does not merely fulfill human longing, he transforms it. He judges it. He saves it. When this claim is softened too much, something essential begins to fade. For many Catholics today, especially those living where faith is costly, the question is not whether dialogue matters. It is whether clarity still matters. They are not asking for a pope who reassures the world that everything is fine. They are asking for a shepherd who strengthens his brothers and sisters in the faith, who can speak to everyone without forgetting to speak clearly as a Catholic to Catholics. The issue is not that the Church recognizes truth wherever it exists. The issue is that she too often fails to say where that truth reaches its fullness. And fullness matters. Without it, dialogue gradually turns into dilution. This does not happen suddenly. It happens slowly, through the accumulation of statements that are technically correct but existentially vague, through gestures that emphasize openness without grounding identity, through language that seeks inclusion but hesitates to proclaim. In such an environment, many believers begin to feel adrift. Not angry. Not rebellious. Simply unsure. They hear talk of mystery, but not of the altar. They hear talk of searching, but not of the Eucharist. They hear talk of unity, but not of the cross. And so they ask, quietly but persistently, where the center is. Catholicism is not held together by emotion alone. It is held together by a center that has weight, by a presence that is not symbolic or interchangeable or abstract. The real presence. When that center is not named, everything else begins to drift. The Pope's words, taken by themselves, can be defended. But pastoral language never exists by itself. It lives within a broader context shaped by years of ambiguity, weakened catechesis, and a faithful increasingly hungry not for complexity, but for truth spoken clearly and without hesitation. This is not a call for harshness. It is a plea for precision. In the Church today, precision is not a luxury. It is an act of charity. And so the heart of the matter is not whether Pope Leo XIV said something false, nor whether he intended to confuse. The real question is whether, in this moment of history, what was said was enough. The Church does not exist simply to take part in global conversation. She exists to guard, proclaim, and hand on a revelation entrusted to her, not invented by her. A revelation with a face, a name, a body broken and given. When language becomes too cautious, too balanced, too concerned with avoiding offense, it risks losing the sharpness that once changed the world. The early Christians did not die for an abstract mystery. They died for a person. And that person still divides history. Today's Catholics live in a world that is often hostile, sometimes indifferent, and frequently confused. They are not asking for endless nuance. They are asking for a compass. They want to know whether Christ still matters uniquely, whether the Church still believes what she has always believed, whether the Eucharist is still the center or merely one symbol among many. This is why a single sentence can matter so much. Faith that is already tested from the outside should not be weakened from within by language that loses its center while trying to broaden its reach. It is not enough to speak the truth. The truth must be spoken clearly, without arrogance, without violence, but without ambiguity. Clarity is not cruelty. It is mercy. Perhaps this moment is an invitation, not only for the Pope but for the entire Church, to remember that dialogue without identity collapses, that openness without anchoring drifts, and that inclusion without proclamation eventually empties itself. The divine mystery does indeed embrace all creation. But it also entered it. And his name was Jesus. If this message touched your heart, like this video and share your thoughts in the comment or comment Amen and stay with us. More Eucharistic stories, deeper reflections, and holy insights are on the way. May Christ in the Eucharist be your light, your rest, your truth. Amen.